Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cold airplane window, watching the glittering web of New York City's lights slowly dissolve into an endless black void. At 42 years old, she'd flown over this same route dozens of times during her Air Force career, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was just another exhausted passenger in seat 12C, drowning in spreadsheets and second-guessing every decision that had led her to this moment. The Boeing 767 hummed steadily through the night sky, carrying 287 souls across the Atlantic toward London. Most passengers had already surrendered to sleep, their overhead lights dimmed, blankets pulled tight against the recycled cabin air. Sarah envied them. Sleep had become a stranger to her ever since the accident, 8 years, 2 months, and 13 days ago. Not that she was counting. She took another sip of lukewarm coffee from her plastic cup, grimacing at the bitter taste. Her laptop screen glowed with financial projections that made her stomach churn. Her consulting firm was hemorrhaging money, and this London deal was their last hope. 3 years of building something from nothing, all riding on a single presentation scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once upon a time, she'd commanded multi-million-dollar aircraft and made split-second decisions that affected national security. Now, she was begging British executives for a contract that might keep her 8 employees from unemployment. "More coffee, ma'am." A flight attendant appeared beside her, professional smile firmly in place despite the ungodly hour. "No, thank you. This one's doing enough damage already." Sarah gestured at her half-full cup. The flight attendant, her name tag read Marcus Chen, chuckled softly. "First time to London." "Actually, I used to fly this route regularly. Military." Sarah surprised herself by volunteering the information. She usually kept that part of her life locked away, hidden beneath layers of corporate professionalism and deliberate forgetfulness. "Oh, thank you for your service." Marcus's smile seemed genuine. "Well, we should have you there right on schedule. Smooth flight so far." As Marcus moved down the aisle, Sarah glanced at her watch, 2:43 a.m. Eastern Time. They were roughly 3 hours into the flight, somewhere over the cold, dark expanse of the North Atlantic. The point of no return, pilots called it, that invisible line where turning back takes longer than pushing forward. She'd crossed it 1,000 times before without a second thought. But tonight, the phrase felt ominous, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite articulate. Sarah closed her laptop and pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos of her daughter, Emma. 16 years old now, all fierce independence and rolled eyes, but still her little girl. The photo showed Emma at her soccer game last week, mud-streaked and triumphant, holding up a trophy. Sarah had missed the first half because of a client call that ran late. Another small failure to add to her collection. She was about to switch off her phone when the plane shuddered. It wasn't much, just a slight tremor, the kind of turbulence that happens on any flight. But Sarah's body responded with the instant recognition of someone whose survival once depended on reading an aircraft's every movement. Her muscles tensed. Her breathing quickened. The coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The cabin lights flickered. Once, twice, then they died completely. For 3 eternal seconds, Flight 447 was plunged into absolute darkness. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribcage. Around her, passengers stirred, confused murmurs rippling through the cabin. Someone gasped. A child whimpered. The emergency floor lighting cast an eerie green glow, transforming familiar faces into ghostly shadows. Then the lights blazed back on, painfully bright. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice over the intercom was steady, reassuring. "We've just experienced a minor electrical fluctuation. Everything is operating normally. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We apologize for any concern." The announcement should have been calming, but Sarah noticed what others didn't. The captain's voice was slightly strained, his words coming just a fraction too quickly. After hundreds of hours in cockpits, she could read the subtext. Something had happened. something the passengers didn't need to know about. She scanned the cabin with tactical precision. Most passengers were settling back into their seats, buying the reassurance, but the flight attendants were different. Marcus stood near the galley, speaking urgently into an internal phone. Two other attendants had converged near the cockpit door, their body language tight with tension. They kept glancing toward the front of the plane, then at each other, then back again. Sarah's military training screamed at her that something was wrong. She unbuckled her seatbelt and started to rise, then caught herself. What was she doing? She wasn't military anymore. She wasn't a pilot. She was a civilian consultant with PTSD and panic attacks who'd sworn never to step into a cockpit again. Whatever was happening up there wasn't her problem. But her eyes kept tracking the flight attendants. Marcus had disappeared behind the cockpit door. The other attendants were whispering frantically, checking their watches, looking worried. Minutes crawled by, 5, then 10. The normal rhythm of the flight felt off, like a heartbeat with an irregular skip. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, the plane shuddered again, more violently this time. Overhead bins rattled ominously. A bag tumbled into the aisle. Passengers who drifted back to sleep jerked awake, fear flashing across their faces. Sarah gripped her armrests, every nerve ending firing. This wasn't normal turbulence. This was something else. Then she heard it, the sound that would change everything. The cockpit door burst open, and Marcus Chen stumbled into the cabin. His face was gray, eyes wide with barely controlled terror. He grabbed the intercom handset, and Sarah watched his hands shake so badly he nearly dropped it. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "If there is anyone on board with pilot experience, any pilot experience at all, please press your call button immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, if you have any flying experience, press your call button now." The words hung in the cabin like a death sentence. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then panic exploded like a shockwave. Passengers sat bolt upright, looking around wildly. Someone screamed. A man shouted, "What's happening?" Children began to cry. The carefully maintained illusion of control shattered into 1,000 pieces. Sarah's finger hovered over the call button above her seat. 8 years. She hadn't touched aircraft controls in 8 years. Hadn't wanted to, couldn't bear to. The nightmares were bad enough, the fireball, the screaming, her best friend's last words crackling over the radio. "Sarah, I can't hold it." But across the aisle, a young mother clutched a sleeping infant to her chest, tears streaming down her face. 3 rows up, an elderly couple held hands, knuckles white. Everywhere Sarah looked, she saw faces. 287 people who'd boarded this flight expecting nothing more dramatic than stale pretzels and a movie. She thought of Emma. Emma, who'd already lost her father to cancer 5 years ago. Emma, who couldn't lose her mother too. Sarah's hand trembled as it moved toward the call button. Then she pressed it. Marcus Chen's legs nearly gave out when he saw the call button light illuminate above seat 12C. He stumbled down the aisle, pushing past panicking passengers, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might explode. Behind him, the cabin had erupted into controlled chaos, people shouting questions, demanding answers, some already crying, others frozen in shock. "You're a pilot," Marcus gasped as he reached Sarah's row, hope and desperation warring in his voice. Sarah stood slowly, her face pale but composed. "Former, Air Force, cargo planes C-17s, but I haven't flown in 8 years." "I don't care if you haven't flown in 80 years, Marcus said, his professional composure cracking. "You need to come with me, now." As Sarah stepped into the aisle, the elderly man across from her grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, his eyes boring into hers. "Can you do this?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. He had kind eyes, crow's feet carved deep by decades of smiling, and a wedding ring that matched the one on his wife's finger. They'd probably been married 50 years, maybe more. "I'm going to try," Sarah said quietly. "Then God bless you," the man whispered, releasing her wrist. Marcus led Sarah toward the front of the plane, and she could feel every eye in the cabin tracking her movement. The weight of 287 lives settled on her shoulders like physical pressure. A woman reached out to touch her arm as she passed. A teenager mouthed, "Thank you," through tears. A businessman in first class was openly weeping. "What happened?" Sarah asked as they approached the cockpit door, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Heart attack, stroke." "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Both of them just collapsed." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Both pilots." Marcus nodded, his face ashen. Captain Reeves went first, grabbed his chest and went down. David, first officer Park, he tried to help, called it in, and then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed too. "It's been maybe 5 minutes. We have a doctor working on them, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The cockpit door swung open and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The scene before her was every pilot's nightmare made real. Captain James Reeves lay sprawled on the cockpit floor, his face gray and waxy, his uniform jacket torn open. A man in jeans and a polo shirt, presumably the doctor, was performing chest compressions with methodical intensity, counting under his breath. First Officer David Park was propped against the side wall, unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored. But it was the empty seats that truly terrified her. The captain's chair and first officer's seat sat vacant, their headsets dangling uselessly. Beyond the windscreen, nothing but impenetrable darkness stretched to infinity. The instrument panels glowed with dozens of lights, screens, and indicators, a dizzying array of modern avionics that looked nothing like the planes she'd flown. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "Are you the pilot?" The doctor looked up, his arms never stopping their rhythm on Captain Reeves's chest. Sweat dripped down his temples. "I'm Dr. Alan Foster. This man's had a massive cardiac event. He needs a hospital in the next 20 minutes or he won't make it." "What about the other one?" Sarah pointed to First Officer Park. "I don't know. No obvious trauma, no signs of heart attack or stroke. He just collapsed." Dr. Foster's voice was tight with frustration. "Could be a dozen things, aneurysm, seizure, toxin. I can't diagnose it here." A female flight attendant appeared in the doorway, her name tag reading Jennifer Walsh. "Marcus, passenger services is going crazy. They want to know what's happening. Should I make an announcement?" "No," Sarah said sharply. "Not yet. We don't need a full-blown panic." She turned to Marcus. "How many flight attendants on board?" "6 total." "Get them together. Brief them privately. Tell them to keep passengers calm, keep them in their seats, and for God's sake, don't let anyone know both pilots are down. Say one pilot is ill and we're managing the situation. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded, some of his professionalism returning with clear instructions to follow. "What are you going to do?" Sarah stared at the empty captain's seat, her hands trembling. "I'm going to sit down and figure out what the hell we're dealing with." As Marcus and Jennifer left to handle the cabin, Sarah forced herself to move forward. Each step felt like walking through concrete. The cockpit seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in, memories flooding back with crushing force. Fire, screaming metal, her co-pilot's voice. "We're going down, we're going down." "No," Sarah said aloud, shaking her head violently. "Not now, not today." She slid into the captain's seat, and the world tilted sideways for a moment. The yoke felt foreign under her hands. The instrument panel was a confusion of digital displays, primary flight display, navigation display, engine indicating and crew alerting system. So different from her old C-17s with their familiar analog gauges and mechanical systems. The autopilot light glowed steadily, engaged. Thank God for small mercies. The plane was flying itself for now. But autopilot couldn't land. Autopilot couldn't communicate with air traffic control. Autopilot couldn't deal with emergencies. Sarah reached for the radio headset with shaking hands and pressed the transmit button. Static crackled in her ears, then cleared. Gander Control, this is Flight 447. Her voice sounded small, terrified. She cleared her throat and tried again, stronger this time. Gander Oceanic Control, this is Transatlantic Flight 447, declaring an emergency. The response was immediate. Flight 447, Gander Control, go ahead with your emergency. Sarah closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke the words that would change everything. Gander Control, this is passenger Sarah Mitchell. I am a former military pilot. Both flight crew members are incapacitated. I repeat, both pilots are unconscious. I have some flying experience, but I've never flown a 767. I have 287 people on board and I'm going to need help. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. When the controller's voice came back, it was carefully controlled, but Sarah could hear the shock underneath. Flight 447, Gander Control copies. Stand by. We're getting you help. Behind her, Dr. Foster grunted with effort. I've got a pulse. Weak, but it's there. He's alive. One pilot alive. One still unconscious for unknown reasons. And Sarah Mitchell, who hadn't flown in 8 years, sitting in a cockpit over the black Atlantic Ocean with 287 lives depending on skills she wasn't sure she still possessed. She looked at the fuel gauges, 3 hours of fuel remaining. She checked their position on the navigation display, 543 nautical miles from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the nearest suitable airport. The numbers glowed green against the dark screen, cold and unforgiving. 543 miles, just over an hour of flying, an hour to remember everything she'd tried so hard to forget, an hour to become the pilot she used to be, an hour to save everyone on this plane or fail them all. Sarah's hands tightened on the yoke and she whispered into the empty cockpit, "Okay, Sarah, you wanted to fly again. Here's your chance." Outside the windscreen, the stars wheeled silently overhead, indifferent to the tiny metal tube hurtling through the darkness, carrying its desperate cargo of hope and fear. The radio crackled to life again. Flight 447, Gander Control. We have someone who wants to talk to you. Stand by for Wing Commander David Harper, RAF retired. He's going to help you bring that plane home. Sarah exhaled slowly. Help was coming, she wasn't alone. But as she stared at the bewildering array of instruments before her, one thought kept circling through her mind like a vulture. What if help isn't enough? Sarah's hands gripped the yoke so tightly her knuckles had turned bone white. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the cool cockpit air. The instrument panels blurred before her eyes, transforming into a kaleidoscope of meaningless lights and numbers. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Not now, please, not now. But the panic attack didn't care about timing. It never did. The cockpit dissolved around her, replaced by the memory that haunted her every nightmare. Suddenly, she wasn't in a 767 over the Atlantic. She was back in that C-17 cargo plane over Nevada 8 years ago. The training exercise. The routine flight that became anything but routine. She could smell it, the acrid stench of burning electronics, the metallic tang of fear. She could hear her co-pilot, Lieutenant Rachel Chen, her best friend since flight school, shouting over the screaming alarm systems. "Engine 2 is on fire. I can't control it." They'd been practicing emergency procedures, ironically enough. A simulated engine failure that became horrifyingly real when a turbine blade shattered, shrapnel ripping through fuel lines and hydraulic systems. Sarah had fought the controls while Rachel worked the emergency checklists, both of them believing, right up until the last 30 seconds, that they could save it. "Sarah, we have to eject," Rachel's voice high with terror. "We're too low, we can make it to the field." Sarah's voice stubborn, refusing to give up. "Sarah, please." The explosion had been beautiful in its own terrible way, a massive orange fireball that consumed the left wing. The C-17 had rolled inverted, dropping like a stone. Sarah had reached for the ejection handle 1 second before Rachel. 1 second that meant everything. Sarah had survived, Rachel hadn't. The ejection seat had malfunctioned, a 1 in 10,000 failure. While Sarah had rocketed clear of the doomed aircraft, Rachel's seat had fired but not separated properly. The investigation called it mechanical failure beyond the pilot's control. Sarah called it murder, her murder, because she'd insisted they could make it, because she'd waited too long. Flight 447, this is Wing Commander David Harper. Sarah, can you hear me? The voice in her headset was calm, measured, with a crisp British accent that somehow cut through the chaos in her mind. Sarah blinked, and the burning C-17 faded, replaced by the 767's cockpit. Her lungs burned. She'd been holding her breath. Yes, I can hear you, Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. Excellent, I'm David. I'm going to be with you for this entire flight, Sarah. You won't be alone for a single second. Can you tell me what you're seeing right now? Sarah forced herself to focus on the instruments. Autopilot is engaged. Altitude 35,000 feet. Speed 490 knots. Heading 65. Fuel showing 3 hours remaining. Perfect. You're reading the instruments correctly. That's a very good sign. David's voice was unhurried, almost conversational. Now, Sarah, I need you to tell me about your flying experience. What aircraft did you fly? C-17 Globemasters. 8 years in the Air Force. Transport operations. I logged about 1,200 hours. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she fell into the familiar pattern of pilot briefing. 1,200 hours. That's substantial experience. Did you ever fly in difficult conditions? Combat zones, Afghanistan, Iraq, crosswind landings in sandstorms, night operations, emergency procedures. As she spoke, Sarah felt her training beginning to override her panic. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. So you're no stranger to pressure, David said. Sarah, I'm looking at the 767 manual right now. I also have a senior 767 captain from Boeing on standby. Her name is Karen Wu, and she knows these aircraft inside and out. Between the three of us, we're going to get you through this. But first, I need to know, are you injured? Are you feeling any symptoms, dizziness, nausea, anything like that? Sarah did a quick self-assessment. No, I'm okay, scared out of my mind, but physically I'm fine. Good, because we think we know what happened to your pilots. The cockpit has a carbon monoxide leak. It was concentrated enough to incapacitate both of them, but it's been venting since the cockpit door opened. You're safe, but we can't bring them back to consciousness until we land. Carbon monoxide. That explained the sudden collapse of both pilots. Sarah glanced back at First Officer Park, still unconscious against the wall. Dr. Foster had moved on to monitoring both pilots now, checking vitals, keeping them alive. David, Sarah said quietly, I need to tell you something. I haven't flown in 8 years because I had an accident. A training exercise went wrong. My co-pilot died. It was my fault. I froze. I made the wrong call. And now I'm sitting here with 287 people depending on me, and I don't know if I can. Stop. David's voice was firm but not unkind. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. In 1991, I was flying a Tornado GR-1 over Iraq during the Gulf War. We were hit by anti-aircraft fire. The aircraft broke apart. My navigator ejected successfully. My seat malfunctioned. I went through the canopy without proper separation, broke my back in 3 places, and crashed in enemy territory. My navigator was captured trying to reach me. He spent 2 months as a prisoner of war because of choices I made in that cockpit. Sarah's breath caught. David. I spent 8 months in hospital learning to walk again. I never flew combat missions after that. For years, I believed I'd failed my navigator, failed my duty, failed myself. But here's what I learned, Sarah. That day didn't define me. The accident wasn't who I was, and your accident doesn't define you either. Tears burned in Sarah's eyes. But Rachel would want you to save these people, David said gently. I never met Rachel, but I know pilots. And I know she wouldn't want her memory to be the reason 287 people don't make it home tonight. You survived for a reason, Sarah. Maybe this is it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 8 years she'd been running, from cockpits, from responsibility, from herself. She'd convinced herself she was broken, that the accident had shattered something essential inside her. But sitting here now, with David's calm voice in her ear and 287 lives in her hands, something shifted. Rachel had died because of a mechanical failure and impossible circumstances. But these people didn't have to die. Not today. Not if Sarah could find the courage to be the pilot she used to be. Okay, Sarah said, her voice steady now. Okay, David, tell me what I need to do. That's my girl, David said warmly. First thing, put your right hand on the autopilot panel. We're not going to disengage it yet, but I want you to understand what you're looking at. Sarah's hand moved to the autopilot controls. The panel showed altitude hold, heading select, vertical speed. Familiar concepts, even if the specific switches were different. I see it. This isn't that different from my C-17. Different layout, but same basic principles. Exactly right. Now, we have about 50 minutes until we need to begin our descent into Halifax. Corinne Wu is pulling up the approach plates and weather information. We're going to use that time to teach you everything you need to know about flying a 767. Can you handle that? Sarah looked out the windscreen at the star-filled darkness. Somewhere down there, beyond the horizon, land was waiting. Halifax was waiting. Her daughter was waiting. All these people were waiting for her to become the person they needed. She thought of Rachel, who'd never gotten the chance to make things right. Who'd never gotten another flight, another chance, another day. I can handle it, Sarah said. Let's bring them home. Behind her, Marcus appeared in the doorway. The passengers are asking questions. What should I tell them? Sarah turned in her seat, meeting his eyes. Tell them we have a pilot. Tell them we have a plan. And tell them we're going to be fine. As Marcus left to address the cabin, Sarah allowed herself one moment of doubt, one whisper of fear. Then she pushed it aside, placed both hands on the yoke, and focused on the instruments before her. The woman who couldn't fly was about to remember how. Sarah, we're going to start with the basics. David Harper's voice filled her headset, calm and reassuring. I want you to look at the primary flight display. That's the screen directly in front of you. Tell me what you see. Sarah studied the main display, her military training kicking in. I see the artificial horizon. Altitude tape on the right showing 35,000. Airspeed on the left showing 490 knots. Heading indicator at the top showing 65 degrees. Brilliant, you're reading it perfectly. David paused. Now here's the good news. A 767 wants to fly. It's designed to be stable, forgiving. The autopilot is doing most of the work right now. Your job is simply to supervise it until we're ready to take over manually. When will that be? Sarah asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Not for another 40 minutes. We have time, Sarah. We have time to teach you everything you need. David's tone shifted slightly. I'm going to introduce you to someone now. This is Captain Corinne Wu from Boeing. She's been flying 767s for 23 years. Corinne, say hello. A woman's voice joined the channel, warm but professional. Hi, Sarah. I want you to know that what you're doing right now, staying calm, reading instruments, following instructions, that's exactly what makes a good pilot. You've already done the hardest part. You sat down in that seat. I don't feel calm, Sarah admitted. I feel like I'm about to jump out of my skin. Good, Corinne said unexpectedly. That means your adrenaline is working. It'll keep you sharp. I've flown thousands of hours and I still get nervous during emergencies. The trick is using that fear, not fighting it. Behind Sarah, Dr. Foster spoke up. Captain Reeves's vitals are stabilizing. He's still unconscious, but his heartbeat is stronger. The other pilot, Park, is the same, steady but not waking up. How long until they need a hospital? Sarah asked. Captain Reeves needs advanced cardiac care within the hour, maybe less. Dr. Foster's face was grim. We need to land soon. Sarah checked the navigation display. Halifax was still 487 nautical miles away. At their current speed, that was roughly 53 minutes. 53 minutes to learn an aircraft she'd never flown, in conditions she couldn't predict, with lives hanging in the balance. "David, what's the weather like in Halifax?" Sarah asked. There was a pause. When David spoke again, his tone was carefully neutral. "It's not ideal. We have crosswinds at 15 knots, gusting to 25. Visibility is down to 3 miles in rain, but you've flown in worse, haven't you?" Sarah had flown in sandstorms in Afghanistan where you couldn't see the runway until you were practically on it. She'd landed C-17s on damaged airstrips with one engine out. But that was 8 years ago, and she'd had working co-pilots beside her. "I've flown in worse," she confirmed. Hopping, she sounded more confident than she felt. "Right then, let's get to work." David's voice became crisp, businesslike. "I want you to put your hands on the yoke. Don't move it, just hold it. Feel what the aircraft is doing." Sarah wrapped her hands around the yoke. Through it, she could feel the subtle vibrations of the aircraft, the tiny adjustments the autopilot was making to keep them stable. It was like holding the reins of a massive, powerful creature, barely contained energy humming beneath her fingers. "I feel it," she said softly. "Good, that's your connection to the aircraft. Now look at the autopilot panel between the seats. You'll see several knobs and switches. The one labeled Alt controls your altitude. The one labeled HDG controls heading. The one labeled SPD controls speed. These are your 3 most important friends right now." Sarah located each control, committing their positions to memory. "Got them." "Excellent. In about 30 minutes, we're going to have you disengage the autopilot and hand fly the aircraft for a few minutes, just to get a feel for how she responds. But first, Karen is going to walk you through the approach sequence." "Karen." Karen Wu's voice took over. "Sarah, landing a 767 is like conducting an orchestra. Everything has to happen in the right order at the right time. I'm going to break it down into steps so simple a child could follow them. Ready?" "Ready," Sarah said, pulling a notepad from the side pocket of the captain's seat. For the next 20 minutes, Karen walked Sarah through every single step of the landing sequence. Descent checklist, speed reductions, flap settings, gear extension, approach speeds. Sarah filled 3 pages with notes, her handwriting cramped and urgent. Marcus appeared in the doorway again. "Sarah, the passengers are getting restless. A few of them have figured out something seriously wrong. There's a guy in 18D who keeps saying he saw both pilots being carried out. What do I tell people?" Sarah turned to face the cabin. Through the open cockpit door, she could see rows of anxious faces. A young mother was clutching her baby, rocking back and forth. An elderly woman was praying, her lips moving silently. A businessman was gripping his armrest so tightly she could see his hands shaking from here. "Tell them the truth," Sarah said quietly. "Tell them both pilots are incapacitated, but we have someone with flight experience in the cockpit. Tell them we're working with ground control, we have expert support, and we're going to land safely in Halifax in less than an hour. Tell them to trust me." Marcus's eyes widened. "Are you sure? That might cause panic." "Marcus, these people aren't stupid. They know something's wrong. Lying to them won't help, but giving them honest information, treating them like adults, that might." Sarah managed a small smile. "And tell them the woman flying this plane is a stubborn ex-Air Force pilot who doesn't know how to quit." Marcus nodded and disappeared into the cabin. A moment later, Sarah heard his voice over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention for an important announcement." That was well done, David said in her ear. Honesty builds trust. Now, Sarah, we need to talk about fuel. You're showing 2 hours and 45 minutes remaining. Halifax is 50 minutes out. That gives us room for error, but not much. If we need to go around, do another approach, we have fuel for maybe 2 attempts, 3 if we're lucky. I'll get it on the first try, Sarah said, with more confidence than she felt. That's the spirit. But if you don't, we try again. There's no shame in a go-around. It's always better to try again than force a bad landing. Sarah nodded, then remembered David couldn't see her. Understood. All right, Corinne chimed in. Let's talk about the hardest part, the actual touchdown. Sarah, have you ever landed anything as heavy as a 767? Negative. My C-17s topped out around 265,000 pounds. What does this bird weigh? Right now, with fuel burn, you're probably around 320,000 pounds. She's going to feel heavy, sluggish compared to what you're used to. But here's the secret. You don't land a 767. You fly it onto the runway. You're going to hold it off, let the weight settle, and let gravity do the work. Sarah absorbed this, adding more notes to her already crowded notepad. Every piece of information could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah, David said, in 5 minutes we're going to have you take manual control, just for a few minutes to get comfortable. Are you ready? Sarah looked at her hands on the yoke. They were still shaking, but less than before. She thought of Rachel, of Emma, of the 287 people behind her trusting her with their lives. I'm ready, she said. Let's do this. Okay, Sarah, this is it. David's voice was steady in her headset. I want you to reach down to the autopilot panel and press the disconnect button. It's the large button marked AP disk. When you do, you'll hear a warning tone. Don't panic, that's normal. The aircraft will be in your hands. Sarah's finger hovered over the button. 8 years. 8 years since she'd manually flown anything more complex than a rental car. Her hand trembled visibly. Sarah, Corinne's voice gentle but firm. Remember what I said. The aircraft wants to fly. All you're doing is guiding it. If anything goes wrong, you can re-engage the autopilot instantly. This is just practice. Sarah pressed the button. The warning tone was sharp, insistent, an electronic bark that made her heart leap into her throat. Suddenly, the yoke came alive in her hands. She could feel everything, the weight of the aircraft, the resistance of air over the wings, the subtle yaw from crosswinds she hadn't even known were there. The 767 dipped slightly to the left. Easy, David coached. Small inputs, she's heavy, don't overcorrect. Sarah's instincts took over. She applied gentle right aileron, bringing the wings level. The aircraft responded sluggishly. Corinne was right. It felt like pushing through molasses compared to her nimble C-17s. But it responded. She was flying. Good, excellent. Corinne's enthusiasm was genuine. You're doing it, Sarah. Now try a gentle turn. Give me 5 degrees right. Sarah eased the yoke right, watching the heading indicator creep from 65 to 70. The aircraft banked smoothly, the horizon tilting in the windscreen. For just a moment, the fear fell away. This was flying, the thing she'd loved more than anything before the accident stole it from her. Beautiful, David said. Now bring it back to 65. Sarah rolled left, overcorrected slightly, then smoothed it out. Her breathing was coming faster, but from exhilaration now, not just fear. Her hands remembered this. Her body remembered this. How does she feel? Corinne asked. Heavy, stable, like driving a bus compared to a sports car, but responsive. I can work with this. That's what I want to hear. Now maintain this heading and altitude for 2 more minutes, then we'll re-engage the autopilot. Those 2 minutes felt simultaneously like 2 seconds and 2 hours. Sarah's arms began to ache from the tension, but she kept the aircraft steady, making constant tiny corrections for wind and trim. When David finally told her to re-engage the autopilot, part of her didn't want to let go. Well done, David said warmly. You've just proven you can fly this aircraft. Now comes the harder part. We need to start our descent." Sarah checked the navigation display. Halifax was 37 minutes away. The green line showing their projected path looked deceptively simple, just a straight line ending at a runway. But Sarah knew better. Between here and there lay 1,000 things that could go wrong. "Sarah, I need to brief you on the weather situation." David's tone had shifted, more serious now. "Halifax has updated their conditions. Winds are now 18 knots, gusting to 30. Visibility down to 2 miles in heavy rain. Cloud ceiling at 800 feet. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Those weren't catastrophic conditions. She'd flown in worse, but they were far from ideal, especially for someone who hadn't landed anything in 8 years. "Can we divert somewhere with better weather?" she asked. "Negative," Corinne said. "You don't have the fuel range to reach anywhere significantly better. Halifax is our best option. But Sarah, I've landed in these conditions hundreds of times. It's manageable, challenging but manageable." Behind her, Dr. Foster's voice cut through. "Captain Reeves's blood pressure is dropping. I don't know how much longer I can stabilize him without proper equipment." The pressure squeezed tighter around Sarah's chest. Not enough time, never enough time. "All right," Sarah said, forcing steel into her voice. "Walk me through the descent." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah followed David and Corinne's instructions with robotic precision. Reduce throttle. Request descent clearance from gander control. Dial new altitude into the autopilot. Watch the aircraft begin its gradual descent toward the storm-tossed Atlantic below. But as they dropped through 25,000 feet, the smooth ride ended. Turbulence hit like a fist. The aircraft jolted violently, throwing Sarah against her harness. Behind her, she heard a crash as something fell in the cabin, followed by screams. "Marcus," Sarah shouted, "status." Marcus's voice came back shaky. "We're okay. A few overhead bins popped open. Minor injuries, nothing serious, but people are terrified." The turbulence intensified. The 767 bucked and shuddered, altitude fluctuating wildly. Sarah gripped the yoke, her knuckles white, even though the autopilot was still engaged. Through the windscreen she could see clouds racing toward them, dark, roiling masses of moisture and violence. "This is the weather system," David said calmly, as if discussing afternoon tea. "You're going to fly through it and then it will clear. Just hold on." At 18,000 feet, they plunged into the clouds. Visibility vanished instantly. The windscreen became a gray void, rain hammering against it with machine gun intensity. The aircraft shook so hard Sarah's vision blurred. Lightning flashed somewhere to their right, close enough that she saw the branching tendrils of electricity. "Sarah, I need you to monitor your airspeed carefully," Corinne said urgently. "Turbulence can cause false readings. Watch for sudden fluctuations." Sarah's eyes locked on the airspeed indicator. It was jumping erratically, 270 knots, 285, 260, 290. The aircraft was being tossed around like a toy. And then at 15,000 feet, everything went wrong at once. The master warning horn blared. Red lights exploded across the instrument panel. The autopilot disconnected with a sharp electronic scream. Suddenly, Sarah had full manual control of a bucking, shuddering 767 in the middle of a thunderstorm, with no warning and no time to prepare. "Warning, autopilot disconnect," flashed across the display. The aircraft immediately began to roll left, pushed by a violent wind shear. Sarah grabbed the yoke with both hands, fighting to level the wings. The aircraft wasn't responding, or it was responding too slowly. They were banking steeper, 30 degrees, 40 degrees. "Pull up, pull up." The ground proximity warning system activated, its synthetic voice urgent and mechanical. But they were at 14,000 feet, nowhere near the ground. The system was confused, overwhelmed by the turbulence and wind shear. David, Sarah screamed into her mic. I've lost the autopilot. The aircraft is rolling. Fight it, David's voice cut through the chaos. Full opposite aileron, don't let it roll. Sarah hauled the yoke right with every ounce of strength she possessed. The muscles in her arms burned. The aircraft fought her like a living thing, wanting to roll, wanting to spiral into the dark Atlantic below. For a terrifying moment, she was back in the C-17, feeling it roll inverted, knowing she was going to die. No, not today, not these people. With a roar of pure determination, Sarah threw her entire body weight into the yoke. The aircraft shuddered, hesitated, then slowly, agonizingly slowly began to roll back toward level. 40 degrees, 35, 30, 25. That's it, Corinne shouted. You've got it, hold it there. Sarah held the yoke with white-knuckled intensity, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The aircraft leveled at 13,500 feet, still bucking in the turbulence but under control. Under her control. I have it, Sarah panted. Aircraft is level, but I can't get the autopilot back online. That's okay, David said, and Sarah could hear the relief in his voice. You're going to hand fly from here. Corinne and I will talk you through every single step. But Sarah, you just saved everyone on that plane. You pulled it back. You did it. In the cabin, pandemonium had erupted. Passengers were crying, praying, some screaming. Marcus and the other flight attendants were rushing through the aisles, checking for injuries, trying to maintain calm in the face of terror. Sarah checked her altitude, 13,200 feet and descending. Airspeed, 280 knots. Heading, 72 degrees, slightly off course but correctable. And straight ahead, breaking through gaps in the clouds, she caught her first glimpse of lights. Land. They were approaching the coast of Nova Scotia. I see lights, Sarah said, her voice hoarse. I see land. That's Cape Breton Island, David confirmed. Halifax is 22 minutes away. You're going to make it, Sarah, but from here on out it's all you. No autopilot, no safety net. Just you, that yoke, and 287 people trusting you to bring them home. Sarah wiped sweat from her eyes and tightened her grip on the yoke. The turbulence was lessening as they descended, but her arms ached from fighting the controls. 22 minutes. She'd been in the cockpit for less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Then let's finish this, Sarah said. Halifax Tower, this is Flight 447. I'm 22 miles out and hand-flying this aircraft. I'm going to need every bit of help you can give me. The tower controller's voice came back, tight with tension. Flight 447, Halifax Tower. We have you on radar. Emergency equipment is standing by. The runway is yours. Bring her home. Lights of Halifax appeared through breaks in the clouds like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Sarah had never seen anything more beautiful or more terrifying. Somewhere down there was a runway, 800 feet of concrete that represented salvation or disaster. There was no middle ground. Sarah, we're going to configure the aircraft for landing now. Corinne's voice was methodical, walking her through each step like a checklist. First, reduce your speed to 250 knots. Pull the throttles back slowly, very slowly. Sarah's right hand moved to the throttle levers. They were cool under her palms, substantial. She eased them back and felt the engine's roar diminish. The airspeed indicator began dropping, 285 knots. 275, 265. Good, hold it at 250. Corinne paused. Now look at the gear lever on the center pedestal. It's a large handle shaped like a wheel. When I say so, you're going to pull it down. You'll feel resistance, then it will drop into place. You'll hear a loud noise, that's the gear doors opening. Don't panic. Sarah located the landing gear lever, her hand hovering over it. This was real now. Irreversible. Once the gear came down, they were committed to landing. There was no turning back. Sarah, David's voice was gentle. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about the last time I had to land an aircraft in an emergency, Sarah said quietly. I'm thinking about all the ways this can go wrong. And I'm thinking about all the ways it can go right, David countered. You've already done the impossible, taken control of an aircraft you've never flown, survived violent turbulence, hand-flown through a storm. Landing is just one more step, and we're here with you. Sarah took a breath. Corinne, I'm ready, gear down. She pulled the lever. The hydraulic motors groaned and the entire aircraft shuddered as three massive landing gear assemblies, weighing tons each, extended into the slipstream. Red lights appeared on the gear indicator panel, then flickered to green one by one. Nose gear. Left main. Right main. 3 green lights, Sarah reported. Gear down and locked. Beautiful, Corinne said. Now we're going to extend flaps. The flap lever is next to the throttles. You're going to move it in stages. Flaps 5, then 15, then 25, then full. Each setting will slow you down and increase drag. The aircraft will want to pitch up. You'll need to trim it out. For the next 5 minutes, Sarah worked through the flap extension sequence. With each configuration change, the 767 transformed from a sleek jet into something more like a controlled falling anvil. The aerodynamics changed completely. The aircraft felt heavier, more sluggish, but also more stable. Halifax Tower, Flight 447, Sarah called. I'm 10 miles out, gear down, flaps 25. Request vectors for the ILS approach to runway 14. Flight 447, Halifax Tower. Fly heading 140. Descend and maintain 3,000 feet. You're cleared for the ILS runway 14 approach. Wind 200 at 18, gusting 28. Visibility 2 miles in heavy rain. Sarah's heart sank. The winds had gotten worse. A direct crosswind on landing, exactly what she didn't need for her first landing in 8 years. Sarah, listen to me. David's voice was firm. You've landed in crosswinds before. This is no different. You're going to crab into the wind on approach, then kick it straight at the last second. You know how to do this. In a C-17, not a 767, Sarah's voice rose with panic. David, I don't know if I can. You can, Corinne interrupted. Sarah, I need you to trust your training. Muscle memory doesn't forget. Your hands know what to do even if your brain doesn't believe it yet. At 3,000 feet, the runway appeared in the distance, 2 parallel lines of white lights stretching toward them through the rain. Sarah lined up on the localizer, watching the crosshairs on her display center. The aircraft was being blown sideways by the wind. She added right rudder, angling the nose into the wind to track straight toward the runway. Airspeed 165 knots, Corinne called. Flaps full, you're looking good. Sink rate 700 feet per minute. But Sarah wasn't looking good. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the yoke steady. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. The runway was getting closer, 2 miles, 1 mile, but something felt wrong. The aircraft was too high, coming in too fast. Speed 175 should be 155, David said urgently. Sarah, you're hot. Add drag or go around. Sarah tried to slow down, pulling the throttles further back, but the aircraft wasn't responding quickly enough. The runway rushed toward her at an alarming rate. At 500 feet, she was still 20 knots too fast and 200 feet too high. Go around, Corinne shouted. Sarah, this approach is unstable. Add power and go around. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to force the landing, to make it work, to not give up. But she remembered Rachel's voice from 8 years ago. Sarah, we have to eject. And her own stubborn response. We can make it. Not this time. This time she would listen. Sarah shoved the throttles forward. The engines roared to life, thrust slamming her back in her seat. The aircraft pitched up, climbing away from the runway that had been so tantalizingly close. Halifax Tower, Flight 447 going around, Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion and exhaustion. In the cabin, passengers who had seen the runway disappear beneath them erupted in confusion and fear. Some were crying. Others were shouting. Marcus's voice over the PA tried to calm them. Ladies and gentlemen, we're simply repositioning for another approach. This is normal procedure. Please remain calm. But there was nothing normal about this. Sarah checked the fuel, 1 hour and 15 minutes remaining, enough for maybe 2 more approaches. Maybe. That was the right call, David said firmly. Sarah, you did exactly what a professional pilot should do. Never force a bad approach. We're going to come around, set up properly, and do this right. Sarah's hands trembled on the yoke as she climbed back to 3,000 feet and turned for another approach. Behind her, Dr. Foster's voice was tight with urgency. Captain Reeves is deteriorating. His blood pressure is critical. I don't know how much longer he has. The pressure was crushing. One pilot dying, another unconscious, passengers terrified, fuel burning away with every passing second. And Sarah, who hadn't flown in 8 years, had to somehow land a 767 in crosswinds and rain. David, she whispered, so quietly she barely heard herself. What if I can't do this? Then you try again, David said simply. And if that doesn't work, you try again. But Sarah, I've been listening to you fly for the past hour. I've heard how you handle the aircraft, how you respond to emergencies, how you make decisions under pressure. You're not just any pilot. You're a damn good pilot. And right now, you're exactly the pilot these people need. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The runway was coming around again in her windscreen as Halifax Tower vectored her for another approach. This time, she would get it right. This time, she would bring them home. Halifax Tower, Flight 447 ready for second approach, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. Flight 447 cleared approach. Wind now 210 at 20, gusting 32. Emergency equipment standing by. Sarah took a deep breath and began the descent once more. The lights of Halifax sparkled below, beckoning her, challenging her. Somewhere down there on that rain-soaked runway was the answer to whether she was still the pilot she used to be, or whether the accident had taken that from her forever. All right, David, Corinne, let's do this right, talk me down. And with 287 lives hanging in the balance, Sarah Mitchell began her second approach. The runway lights materialized through the rain like a beacon from heaven itself. Sarah's eyes burned from exhaustion. Her arms ached from fighting the controls for over an hour, but her focus had never been sharper. This was it. The second approach. The last real chance. 8 miles out, Corinne's voice was steady, professional. Airspeed 180 knots. Altitude 2,500 feet. You're on the glide slope, Sarah. Perfect. Sarah's hands gripped the yoke with practiced precision now. The panic had burned away, leaving only pure concentration. She'd found something in herself during that first failed approach. Not confidence exactly, but acceptance. Acceptance that she was the only one who could do this. Acceptance that failure wasn't an option. Acceptance that somewhere inside her, the pilot she used to be was still alive. 6 miles, airspeed 170, sink rate 700 feet per minute. David's accent was soothing, rhythmic, like a drumbeat keeping time. You're looking beautiful, Sarah. Hold what you've got. The aircraft was being pushed sideways by the crosswind. Sarah kept the nose angled right, crabbing into the wind to maintain the center line. Outside the windscreen, rain hammered the glass in sheets. Lightning flickered in the distance. But through it all, those runway lights stayed centered in her vision. 4 miles, gear down, 3 green, flaps full, airspeed 160. Corinne was calling out each checkpoint like a co-pilot. Speed is perfect. Glide slope is perfect. You are nailing this approach. At 1,000 feet, Sarah broke through the cloud layer. Suddenly, the ground was visible, Halifax sprawling below, streets and buildings and the dark ribbon of runway straight ahead. Emergency vehicles lined both sides, their red and blue lights creating a corridor of hope. Fire trucks, ambulances, dozens of them, all waiting for her. 500 feet, David said. You're going to start feeling ground effect soon. The aircraft will want to float, Don't let it. Keep the descent rate steady. Sarah's breathing was measured now, controlled. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same breathing technique she'd learned in combat flight training. The runway was close now, so close she could see individual lights, see the painted numbers. 14. Behind her, the cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was pressed against their window or staring straight ahead, frozen in prayer or terror or hope. Marcus stood in the cockpit doorway, one hand gripping the frame, watching Sarah's every move. 400 feet, airspeed 155. Corinne's voice had dropped to almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. You're in the slot, Sarah. This is textbook. But then the wind hit. A violent gust slammed into the aircraft from the right, pushing them sideways. The runway lights shifted left in the windscreen. Sarah's heart lurched. They were drifting off centerline, not much, but enough. Enough to miss the runway, enough to put them in the grass, enough to kill everyone. Correction, David barked. Right rudder, get back on centerline. Sarah's foot jammed the right rudder pedal hard, too hard. The aircraft yawed violently right, overcorrecting. The runway swung back the other way. She was losing it, losing control, the ground rushing up at 700 feet per minute. Easy, Corinne shouted. Small inputs, finesse it. Sarah's training took over completely. Her conscious mind shut down and muscle memory, 8 years dormant but never truly forgotten, exploded to life. Her hands and feet moved in perfect coordination, making a dozen tiny corrections in rapid succession. Left aileron, right rudder, throttle adjustment, trim. The aircraft steadied, straightened, lined up once more with the center line. 200 feet, David's voice was electric. Sarah, you're going to kick out the crab in 5 seconds. Wait for my mark. 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark, kick it straight. Sarah slammed the left rudder pedal to the floor while simultaneously applying right aileron. It was the most counterintuitive maneuver in aviation, turning the nose one direction while banking the other. But it was the only way to land in a crosswind. The aircraft's nose swung left, aligning with the runway, while the right wing dipped to counter the sideways drift. 100 feet, 50 feet. The runway rushed up to meet her. Sarah could see every detail now, the painted stripes, the tire marks from thousands of previous landings, the rainwater pooling on the surface. Her right hand eased the throttles back to idle. The engines quieted to a whisper. 30 feet, 20 flare, flare. Sarah pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose slightly, beginning the flare that would transition them from controlled flight to controlled descent. The main wheels were seconds from contact. She held the nose up, held it, feeling the aircraft sink, feeling gravity take hold. The main landing gear kissed the runway with a thump that rattled her teeth. For one terrifying instant, Sarah thought they would bounce. The aircraft lifted slightly, the main wheels losing contact with the pavement, but she pushed the yoke forward gently, firmly planting them back down. The nose gear dropped, slamming onto the runway with a bang. Reversers now, Corinne screamed. Sarah grabbed the thrust reverser levers and pulled them back. The engines howled as thrust reversers deployed, redirecting engine power forward to slow the aircraft. The 767 shuddered, protesting, fighting, but slowing. Sarah's feet found the brake pedals, applying pressure gradually, carefully, feeling the anti-skid system pulse beneath her feet. 320,000 pounds of aircraft and humanity was decelerating, 130 knots, 100 knots, 80 knots. The runway markers flashed past. They'd touched down 1,000 feet from the threshold. The runway was 8,800 feet long. They had room. They had time. 60 knots, 40 knots, 20 knots. The aircraft rolled to a stop, with 3,000 feet of runway remaining. For a moment there was only silence. Sarah sat frozen, hands still gripping the yoke, unable to believe it was over, unable to believe they were on the ground, unable to believe she'd actually done it. Then the radio exploded with sound. Flight 447, you are down. You are down. Halifax Tower's controller was screaming, laughing, crying all at once. Emergency crews are approaching. Outstanding job, outstanding. Sarah, David's voice was thick with emotion. You bloody magnificent woman, you did it. You brought them home. Corinne was sobbing openly now, her voice breaking. That was the most beautiful landing I've ever seen. Sarah, you saved them. You saved them all. Emergency vehicles swarmed the aircraft like ants, surrounding them with flashing lights. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see firefighters and paramedics running toward them. Behind her, the cabin erupted, not in panic now, but in raw, primal relief. People were crying, laughing, hugging strangers, screaming with joy. Marcus stumbled into the cockpit and wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, sobbing into her shoulder. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sarah's hands finally released the yoke. They were shaking uncontrollably, her whole body trembling with adrenaline crash. She looked at those hands, the hands that had just landed a Boeing 767, the hands that had saved 287 people, the hands she'd believed were broken forever. I did it, she whispered, then louder, I did it. Yes, you did, David said softly. Now shut down those engines and let those paramedics help your pilots. You've earned your rest, Captain Mitchell. Captain Mitchell. The title felt foreign, impossible, but also right. For the first time in 8 years, it felt right. Sarah reached for the engine cutoff switches as paramedics burst through the cockpit door, rushing to Captain Reeves and First Officer Park. Outside, hundreds of airport personnel had gathered, standing in the rain, applauding. She'd done it. Against every odd, against every fear, against 8 years of running and hiding and believing she was broken. Sarah Mitchell had brought them home. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a wall-length window at Boeing's Seattle facility, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Beyond it, a brand-new 767 sat on the tarmac, gleaming silver in the afternoon sun. Her hand unconsciously traced the outline of the aircraft in the condensation on the window. Beautiful, isn't she? A familiar British accent made her turn. David Harper stood behind her, older than she'd imagined from his voice alone, late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. They'd met in person 2 months ago at an aviation safety conference, and the connection had been instant. The voice that had guided her through the darkest moment of her life belonged to a man who'd become her closest friend and mentor. She's perfect, Sarah said, smiling. Hard to believe I landed one of these in a thunderstorm. Landed it brilliantly, David corrected, moving to stand beside her. The NTSB report came out last week. Did you see it? Sarah nodded. The investigation had concluded that a hairline fracture in the cockpit's air circulation system had caused carbon monoxide to accumulate to dangerous levels. Captain Reeves's pre-existing heart condition had made him vulnerable to cardiac arrest. First Officer Park had simply been overcome by the fumes. Both men had survived, Reeves after emergency cardiac surgery, Park after 2 days in intensive care. The FAA had issued a directive affecting 847 aircraft worldwide. Sarah's emergency had potentially prevented dozens of future accidents. They're calling you a hero, David said softly. I'm not a hero, I just did what needed to be done. Sarah had repeated these words countless times over the past 6 months to reporters, to talk show hosts, to the aviation magazines that kept calling. The attention had been overwhelming at first. Her face had been everywhere, newspapers, television, social media. The woman who saved Flight 447, they called her. But the real story wasn't about heroism, it was about healing. How's therapy going? David asked, reading her mood. Good, really good actually. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing him a photo of her latest session. Dr. Morrison has me doing exposure therapy. I've been flying small planes at the local airfield. Cessnas mostly. Last week I soloed for the first time since Rachel. David's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. Rachel would be proud of you. Sarah's eyes misted. I visited her grave last month. First time in 8 years I could face it. I told her about the flight, about the landing, about how I finally understood that her death wasn't my fault. It was just a terrible, unavoidable accident. She wiped her eyes. I think I finally forgave myself. That's the real miracle, David said. Not the landing, the forgiveness. They stood in comfortable silence, watching ground crews service the 767. Sarah thought about that night, the terror, the impossible decisions, the moment when she'd chosen to try again instead of forcing a bad landing. That choice had saved 287 lives, but more than that, it had saved her own. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Mom, just got accepted to the Air Force Academy, following in your footsteps." Sarah's breath caught. Emma, her 16-year-old daughter who'd spent the last 8 years watching her mother hide from the sky, was going to be a pilot. The irony was beautiful. "Good news?" David asked. "The best." Sarah showed him the text, unable to stop grinning. "She wants to fly." Of course she does. She watched her mother do the impossible. The door behind them opened and Marcus Chen walked in, along with a dozen other people Sarah recognized immediately. The elderly couple from row 23, Harold and Margaret, the young mother with the infant, Jessica, Dr. Alan Foster, Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant. They were all here for the same reason. The 6-month reunion celebration Boeing was hosting for Flight 447. "Sarah," Marcus embraced her tightly, "have you seen the video?" "What video?" Marcus pulled out a tablet, queuing up footage. It was Cockpit voice recorder audio synchronized with animation. Sarah watched herself take control of the aircraft, heard her own voice, terrified but determined, declaring the emergency. She heard David's calm guidance, Karen's expert instructions, her own increasingly confident responses. The animation showed the first failed approach, the go-around, and then the second approach. Sarah watched the animated 767 fight through crosswinds, correct for drift, and touch down perfectly on centerline. The audio captured her final words, "I did it." "This is being used in pilot training now," Marcus said quietly. "Your landing is being studied in aviation schools around the world. You've changed how we train pilots for emergencies." Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd spent 8 years running from aviation, convinced she had nothing left to contribute. Now her worst moment and her greatest triumph were teaching the next generation. "There's something else." Harold, the elderly man, stepped forward. His wife Margaret stood beside him, holding a thick album. "We wanted you to have this." Sarah opened the album. It was filled with photos, all 287 passengers from Flight 447, each with a handwritten message. A teenage girl who decided to become a pilot because of Sarah. A businessman who'd quit his stressful job to spend more time with family. The young mother, Jessica, holding her baby daughter, now 6 months older, with a note. "She wouldn't be here without you. We named her Sarah." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she turned page after page. Wedding photos, graduations, new bobbies, family reunions, birthday parties. Life, abundant, beautiful life, that existed because she'd found the courage to sit in that cockpit. "You didn't just save our lives," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "You reminded us how precious they are. Every single person on that plane changed after that night. We started living differently, loving harder, taking fewer things for granted." Sarah looked around at the faces gathered here, survivors, all of them, bound together by one terrifying night over the Atlantic. They'd created a foundation in her name, raising money for pilot mental health services. They held annual reunions. They'd become a family forged in crisis and sealed in gratitude. "I have an announcement," Sarah said, her voice steady and strong. "Boeing has offered me a position as an aviation safety consultant. I'm going to help design better emergency procedures and train pilots in crisis management. She paused, looking at David. And I'm going back to flying, really flying. I start my 767 type rating next month. The room erupted in applause. David beamed with pride. Marcus hugged her again, this time lifting her off her feet. Later, as the sun set over Seattle, Sarah stood alone on the tarmac beside the 767. She placed her hand on the fuselage, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. This aircraft, this magnificent machine, had been her salvation and her redemption. For 8 years, she'd believed the accident had destroyed her, that she'd lost her identity as a pilot forever. But that night over the Atlantic, fighting through storms and fear and self-doubt, she discovered something profound. She hadn't lost herself. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to be found again. Her phone rang. Emma's face appeared on the screen. "Mom, did you get my text?" "I did, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "You're not mad. I know flying has been hard for you." Sarah looked up at the 767, at the sky beyond it turning pink and gold with sunset. "Flying isn't hard anymore. It's where I belong. It's where I've always belonged." "Will you teach me, before I go to the academy?" "I would love nothing more." As Sarah walked back toward the Boeing facility, she thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, broken, hiding, convinced her best days were behind her. And she thought about the woman she was now, whole, healing, ready to fly again. The cockpit had gone silent that night, but a woman's voice had filled it. "I'm landing this plane." She hadn't just been talking about the aircraft. She'd been landing herself, bringing herself back from the wreckage of the past, back from fear and guilt and self-doubt, back to the ground where she could finally stand tall. 287 people had boarded Flight 447, expecting nothing more than a routine trip across the Atlantic. Instead, they'd been given a second chance at life. And so had Sarah Mitchell. She'd saved them, but in the end they'd saved her too. The sky was calling again, and this time Sarah Mitchell was ready to answer. The end.